Well, thank you all for being here. Oh, thanks. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you for being here at the conference and also here this afternoon, because I know this is like the last run, so I'm glad to see the faces, definitely. And I'll try and, not keep you any longer than necessary, because I know everybody wants to get home. We're going to focus pretty much on what makes leaders in project management successful in a consistent manner. So that's going to be our focus today. Looking specifically at our basic project management, these are all areas I'm sure that you're familiar with. The phases of project management and then the knowledge areas from the PMBOK. All of us, mostly all of us, I'm sure, are here and getting PDUs and recertifying through PMP. Let me ask you, do you think that the PMBOK provides you with what you need in order to be a successful leader in project management? If you were to read the PMBOK and learn that, do you think you'd be successful at leading in project management? Is anybody?
Only partially.
Only partially? Did I hear anything else? Any?
I think it gives you basics, but that's like what experience.
All right, I agree, and I'll go even further to say that you probably have a difficult time even passing the PMP just by looking at the PMBOK. So, there are definitely other areas that we need to focus and give our attention to in order to be consistently successful in leadership, in project management or otherwise. So that is correct. It's not a one-stop shop. Who wants to work on your team? That's the question I want to throw out there. When you look at yourself specifically in your organizations, can anybody raise your hand if you've ever had anyone to volunteer to work on your team with you, to join your project? Does anyone have that positive experience? A lot of times it's not an option, but sometimes some people do volunteer. I see one hand here.
It's not always an option here either.
Right. But you've had people volunteer? You've had people volunteer? They're assigned now. Oh, okay. So from your perspective, why do you think they volunteered to be on your project?
I guess they just prefer the style of project management that I have.
Okay.
Maybe the atmosphere.
Are there any elements that you know of that are unique to your style? Not necessarily unique to your style, but signature to your style of managing projects?
I think honestly, I'm not sure. I mean, I just try to be pretty level-headed and reasonable and common sense, and that's basically what it all boils down to.
Okay, okay. And what about you? Do you think there are any specific reasons they gravitated to your team?
Well, yes, probably because I like to remove obstacles. Not like it, but
Okay.
that's what I consider my role as mainly is, I need to enable folks to be able to do their jobs.
So you're good at removing obstacles, clearing the path for the folk on your team. That's great. And, pretty much here what we'll see are different elements that we're going to go through this afternoon as far as what makes a project manager, a leader, successful. One, of course, being the fact that they know who they are. We're going to talk a bit about that as far as examining yourself, not only as a leader, but first and foremost as an individual. It helps you as far as leading relationships, and then it also helps you to understand other people and understand who they are, respective to the perspective that they're coming from. Project managers often wear many hats, and they build from multiple sources of power. And this is especially good for leaders in project management to do so. They're proactive. They're not necessarily waiting, being reactive as far as what needs to get done, but a lot of time their risk mitigation plan is initiated by them identifying risks and what are potential landmines in the future. And they hold themselves accountable as well as others accountable. They inspire and motivate others. They serve as well as managing and leading. They're serving simultaneously. And they're team builders. So the challenge that project managers have as opposed to, say, other leaders, traditional leaders in organizations, is you have a very short amount of time to build that team. So to me, that is a far more difficult place to be. But it's still just as important to build a cohesive team, even if it is for, say, a 6-month project. They appreciate diversity and different perspectives, and they understand that the more that they know from different stakeholders, the more successful they can be. And they're always willing to accept the responsibility because ultimately the buck stops with us as project managers. We're the ones who receive most of the accolades, but on the flip side, we're also the ones to receive most of the responsibility. So as I mentioned before, you know, successful project managers, they pretty much know who they are if they're repeatedly successful. These are the different 5 components that we're looking at that tends to affect individuals. So for example, we have different individuals in this room, and I'd be willing to bet that from the beginning of today till to now, around 3:30, somewhere around there, we have experienced a challenge, whether it was a thought that we thought about something that we have to take care of or something we experienced yesterday. So that may be in our mental thoughts. Socially, we may have an issue in a relationship at work, or we're either mothers or fathers, husbands or wives, daughters or sons. We may have a family issue that's taking place socially, physically. Someone may have an ailment. There may be someone in this room right now, physical pain that they're suffering from. Or emotionally, you know, I live in Atlanta. A lot of times you can arrive at work and be irritable from the road rage that you experience and exhausted before 8 o'clock even starts. You know, or spiritually, you feel like, okay, I'm working 60 hours a week. I don't have time to focus on a relationship that I have with God. You know, I haven't, you know, put that the priority that it should be. So all of these different elements could be influencing you or myself as an individual, and we're bringing that to the table. So it's important to know what's affecting us, how we're dealing it, how we're managing it. So we take that into consideration when we have expectations of others, communicate to others, and similarly when we're receiving communication from others and dealing with individuals on our team. What we know as project managers is the final deadlines that we have to get things done, and we know the deadlines that we have for the deliverables that we're expecting from these respective people. And we're hoping that all we can do is just ask you to get this done by this exact date, and you're going to give it to us on a silver platter. But a lot of times it doesn't work that way. And the more that we have those relationships formed with the individuals with which we're working, the more we can understand how to motivate them and understand what specifically is important to them. Relationships, you know, a lot of times are far more important than we give them credit in project management. But those project managers who are consistently successful, who are repeatedly successful throughout an organization, I mean, you may be in an organization for 10 years and you may manage 20 projects or more, you know, by the time that your tenure ends there. So it's not just about this 6-month project, but it's about your tenure with the individuals. And you want to know that you've done the best that you could to not only maintain that project in a successful way, but also maintain relationships with those potential people that you're going to have on your projects over and over again. Know yourself from the perspective of doing a SWOT analysis. You know, this is basic strategic planning 101, as far as identifying what are your strengths, specifically knowing them. And I think a lot of times, do you have a question? Okay. I think a lot of times, you know, we look at ourselves and, you know, a lot of times we may know our strengths more than our weaknesses. I think it's more difficult for us to focus on those. And it's important for any successful project manager to know these are the areas that I'm improving or that I'm working on. Would anybody care to share, like perhaps an area where they're specifically working on right now as a leader, professional, or what have you? Any area that they are improving or building on professionally? Anyone? So the patience, you feel like, is an area of growth for you. Okay. And what are you doing to work on that? What do you think is helping you to become more patient?
Counting to 1,000 before I.
Okay.
That's one of the things. Also, taking courses in better communication to help me understand how to better, I guess, not go off the deep end when somebody does something anyway.
Okay. And that's good. You know, it helps us to understand where our areas of improvement are. Like for me, for example, currently I'm working on development of IT and PMO within an IT department. I've managed a lot of projects that dealt with IT implementations, IT functionality. This is my first time actually within an IT department. So I'm like a sponge, really. I'm like a little kid just learning a lot of different things, but it requires me to have focus more attention with regard to the technical aspects that I wouldn't have had to needed to know in the past. Requires me to spend more time, you know, just from a learning, educational perspective from the individuals I'm working with. So as a project manager, you need to recognize this is the environment I'm in. What do I need to learn from this environment, from the people, with regard to the service that I'm delivering. What do I need to know or do differently? Or even better, you may be good at something, but you can be even better at it. So I think that is good for us to recognize those opportunities so that we can improve on those. You must know who you are and have confidence in yourself if you're going to connect with others and influence them. No one should think you're perfect. You shouldn't think that you're perfect, but you should be able to be confident in where your strengths lie. As project managers, as leaders in general, we have to be able to communicate that, yes, we are ultimately responsible in this project and that we do have our eyes continuously on all elements of the project. Have confidence in your skills and abilities. So, for example, if you have areas that need improvement, you need to address those so that you ensure that you're not coming in feeling sort of off edge. You don't really know how to handle what you're doing, and so it's not hindering the project. If you're taking that correct, accurate assessment of yourself, then you can address where those gaps are. And who are you? Specifically looking at two different perspectives I like to do. One from the behavioral perspective, one from the personality. Anyone here, is anyone familiar with the DISC? You took it? Oh, okay, so everybody should be familiar with it now. So, yeah, he was actually referring to my workshop. He was in there this morning, and there were two people in the room that were familiar with it. And it all depends, I guess, on what arena that you operate in. And we both were, pretty much surprised, but not surprised because as project managers, we're so tied to specific tactical deadlines. And the DISC is dealing more from a people perspective, which is really a huge plus, a huge advantage for any leader in project management or otherwise to be successful. However, a lot of times we don't focus on that. But I'd be willing to bet that the most long-term successful project managers, project leaders, are those who are very strong when it comes to people-oriented skills. So the DISC specifically is focusing on 4 behavioral types. I'm not going to reiterate it too much since he talked about that during lunchtime. But as far as knowing specifically who you are and where you fall into this aspect is very important. And similarly here on this personality side, which looks at the Myers-Briggs as a framework. The most popular one, obviously, is extroversion and introversion. Are you, they say, outgoing? Do you get your energy more so from working with people or more so from looking introspectively and spending time, perhaps brain building with yourself? So these are different ways that people look at things, whether it's intuitive or do you work more so black and white, you need to see the numbers, things of that nature. Why this is important is not only to know how you make decisions, but also to understand other people. Sometimes we're in a meeting or what have you, and someone says something and we just think, that is just the craziest thing. And a lot of times it has to do with the fact that they think completely different from us. And when you understand these behavioral types, these different personality types, different from ourselves and how different they are from ourselves, it helps us to appreciate the different perspective. But otherwise, we just think, well, maybe I'm the strange one because I'm thinking this different way in the room, or vice versa. But it's very important for us to embrace where we are, who we are, and it helps us to understand and embrace others. And repeatedly successful project managers, they lead by principles. And this is pretty much something that's true with leaders in general. It's not just about having knee-jerk decisions, but it's about values that people know that you're known for and that they can expect that from you. There's a reactionary focused way of making decisions. For example, as a project manager, we get a lot of pressure from a lot of different sources, whether it's the CFO or the customer who we're delivering the project from, or the COO may say, hey, do A, B, or C because this will help the project go faster. And even though you may know that that may be against customer company regulations, it's something that you may entertain doing because the COO said it. Or if you're going to lead based upon principles, you're going to basically follow the regulations and the laws that you are held accountable to, whether or not even the chief operating officer of the organization says it. And guess what? Your team is going to respect you for that, and that's what they're going to expect. They're going to expect integrity and consistency from you, and in turn, hopefully deliver that back at you. You have to walk the walk. You have to walk the talk as a project manager. And the question lies, where does your integrity stand as a person? It's not just a project. Again, this is something that's going to be long-term, not just from this project, but your reputation follows you to the next project, on so forth. Leading by example ranks number 1 as far as being what contributes to effective leadership, according to the Opinion Research Corporation at least. Repeatedly successful project managers, as mentioned earlier, they wear many hats, and they draw from many different power sources. These specifically right here shows different areas of power that project managers can draw from. Let me ask you, when you look at these different areas, whether it be the position or role, say, for example, if they do have direct reports, which is less and less common among many of us as project managers, do they influence based upon their ability to influence? They have a charismatic personality, or they're innovative. As he had mentioned during the lunchtime, are they able to control the resources as far as from the perspective, are they located in the finance department or things of that nature? Is it relationships? They've been at the company for 10 plus years, so they know a lot of people on the third or fourth floor. Or is it information? Are they hoarding information that only they know and most other people don't know? These are different types of power that we can exercise as far as managing and leading others. Can anyone share perhaps the most recent type of power that they use, or the power type that they use most often?
I would say probably relationship.
Okay. So knowing people, knowing the right people helps you to get things done, make decisions?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the one I really would like to work out of. But
Which one would you prefer to work out of?
I feel more comfortable working out of.
Okay. And which one would you prefer to work out of?
I don't know, sometimes I just want to be mean about it.
Okay. And use your authority, your position, and just say, hey, just do it. Okay. Okay. Anybody else care to share what type of power that they use to get things done? How about, what type of power do you think is best to use? Depends on the situation.
Whatever the problem may be. Some days it may be your skills or knowledge that you've had from past experiences that you're going on, and that helps reaffirm that you're moving in the right direction because you're able to help solve the problem. I mean, other days it may be your influence, your relationships, where you are, you have to adapt based on whatever the problem is.
So you have to be agile, as we would say. Any other perspectives regarding best form of power to utilize?
Really, there's only two kinds. There's either positional power or it's a blend, some type of power that comes out of everything else, and how you utilize that blend for any given situation.
So you would say, just to make sure I hear you correctly, there are only two types of power?
Personally, I just had it down to that. To me,
Right.
it's either your position
Okay.
or organization, or it's a blend of all those things, and it depends on the situation to what blend of that power you exercise.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with him. 'Cause
Mhm.
if you have a relationship, but you have not the knowledge or skills,
Okay.
that's going to hinder that piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't have control or access to resources, even though you have the relationship, you still can't. I mean, it's like that's kind of work together.
That makes a lot of sense. So you feel like it needs to be comprehensive, the power sources from which you draw, that they naturally are comprehensive. And those answers are all correct. I specifically, especially like from an individual perspective, the personality influence one, because I think it's something as an individual you carry no matter where you go. Like there's certain people in your lives that whatever setting you put them in, whether they're in a grocery store, they're at home, or they're at work, they have a sense of influence. They're able to influence others. And that's something that helps you, like you said, a lot of times there is a crossover, but it helps you to build relationships because they're able to connect with others and build that relationship power. All of these are very helpful in especially different situations, as he mentioned earlier. And the way to look at it is really, what is the healthiest way to use power in that situation or scenario. The role position one, like you said, it can be much quicker at times, but it's not something that we all have access to in every scenario. Repeatedly successful project managers are proactive. We talk about risk management a lot in project management, and what does that really mean? One element of it is looking, forecasting, and not necessarily waiting to be reactionary, making sure that we're keeping that register of risk and knowing what may happen or may not happen. So we're not really just sitting and waiting for the risk to occur. So that's one thing that a good leader is doing. They're forecasting, they're navigating the ship for the rest of the people that are on staff. A leader is one who sees more than others see, who sees farther than others see, and who sees before others do. That's not to say that the project manager knows more than anyone or everyone else on the team, but the expectation is that they know more about more things with regard to the project than anyone else on the team. So the expectations are very high. So if no one else is forecasting the risks or the potential landmines in the future as a project leader, guess what? It's expected of us to do that. So be proactive. They must see things before everyone else, as we emphasize. Know the distance, whether it's good, better, or best. You know, this is focusing especially on not only being on time, under budget, but also knowing how to take it to the next level with regard to success or performance. And that's what a good project manager does. They really focus on not just bringing it at one level, not necessarily saying that they're going to a gold plating level, but they're setting the bar high. So being proactive, living by design and not default. And this is, I know. I actually work with her in Atlanta, so I'm gonna. Activity does not equal accomplishment. You know, this is basically saying, you know, it's good to be proactive, and it's especially good to not just have a checklist with regard to what you expect people to do or even expect of yourselves. A lot of times we have limited time in the day. Ideally, we would love it for every one of us to have all of our projects completed successfully on time or under budget. That doesn't always happen. So you want to make sure that the time that you have is dedicated to the priorities, whether that deals with managing risks or managing project elements. So you want to specifically look at what is the return of investment with regard to managing the projects that you have. We have the business requirements, definitely, but ensuring that we're prioritizing what we're doing and making sure that our time is used wisely and most strategic. Project manager, what you want to do is if there are responsibilities someone else can handle that requires a better expertise of theirs versus yours, delegate it. Ensure that you have the best quality, the best value for the work that's being carried out. And hold yourselves as well as others accountable. And this is something that an effective leader is going to do. They're going to measure everyone's performance. Everyone's deliverables is transparent and reported on a regular basis. So this helps not only for people to be on the same page, but to understand what others are doing. So I'm not looking at you and saying, hey, why am I carrying all the weight? I see, wow, okay, well, she has a lot to do too, okay? You know, I don't feel so bad. And so when the work is transparent, it really helps for multiple reasons. If you can't bite, don't show your teeth. And I like this quote, you know, especially from the project management perspective, because we're constantly expecting so much of others, holding others accountable, and yet a lot of times we have no legitimate authority, as they would say. It's important to have some type of accountability channel before you even start the project. We all would love to manage with the carrot, you know, versus the stick, of course, but you have to have some type of accountability streamline or channel that you're able to use. Earlier in the other session on this, one gentleman said, you know, at the very beginning, they pretty much have an escalation plan. He doesn't like to use it because he's very good relationships, so he doesn't often have to use it. But knowing what the process is that you have for accountability can save you time once you actually are managing the project. And it's a way of mitigating risk, if you will, of underperformance or people not being compliant with deliverables. And these are just benefits specifically of basically managing, holding others accountable, measuring performance. You know, it allows you to strengthen communication, as we mentioned earlier, to track the progress and the process so that you know exactly where you are performing and where others are performing. It increases appreciation of the project and what everyone else is doing on the project. It allows alignment. So I'm in IT, but I know specifically what marketing is doing or how I can work with them, how I can help them, how they can help me. Versus some projects, I don't know if you've ever served on projects where, you know, it's pretty much this group together. The project manager may know a lot about what everyone's doing, but this person over here has no idea what that person over there is doing. You know, that just doesn't help. It's not conducive for a healthy long-term project relationship. And it's it inevitably allows you to be alert of any negative performance and basically address it before it becomes a further problem. And it helps for you to be able to reinforce great performance. So if you're tracking performance and someone who's constantly on the green with regard to their deliverables, make sure that you recognize them for that. Scorecard should be very simple, very clear, good, risky, or low. These are examples that everyone understands. Green, yellow, red, everyone understands that. So make sure that the way you're communicating is very easily understood by all those involved. After all, to make a beautiful omelet, you have to break an egg. And this is just saying that sometimes there are those hard conversations that you have to make with others, and be prepared to do those in a way that is courageous but possibly challenging. Repeatedly successful project managers, they inspire, they motivate others. These are people who people look up to. They want to join their teams. They volunteer to join their teams at times. What we're looking for is the ability to be able to set the temperature. So if we're leading a team, how can we influence the attitudes on that team, the values on that team? That's taking it really a notch beyond what we're typically doing with regard to just, pretty much setting the business requirements and deliverables that are due. We need to be conscious of what energy are we bringing to the table. We want them to have a positive energy. Is that what we're bringing? Efforts. Are our efforts going to match what we're expecting from them? If we want them to work till 8 o'clock, are we willing to work till 8 o'clock? Are our values reflective of the organization, since that's what we're expecting of those in our team? Do we have a positive attitude, or are we complaining about the sponsors giving us too much work? Are we results-oriented, focused on getting it done? These are elements that we always want from perfect project team members, but we have to also be willing to give those out in order to get them. Influence is a process. Even the most powerful project managers, they have to build relationships in order to be able to influence their team members. And there are ways to do that: developing the relationships, establishing and maintaining that credibility. So I may not have worked on your team. I may have not been your team member, but this person over here has. So your credibility, your reputation follows you throughout the organization, throughout the project management industry. Do your research. Ensure that your message is accurate. Don't attend a senior leadership team member meeting and then come to a project team meeting and say, well, hey, I heard they're having a layoff in a couple months. Things of that nature feed the rumor mill. They increase negativity versus, on the flip side, being an employee morale booster for your project team. And continuously obtain knowledge and understanding of what issues are relevant to your project. Who are the changing stakeholders? And how does that impact your project? These things are good to know, especially for those environmental changes specifically around your industry. And definitely gain trust of others. That's going to help you to make decisions more quickly, to be able to trust your team members. You can empower them, save time for yourselves, and then they'll also listen to you more expeditiously if they know that they can trust you. Some people lead and they have no followers. Are they truly leading? That is the question, which is what this proverb is saying. And let me ask this room, are there any in here who think that you can have a good leader that has no followers? Is that possible? Does anyone think it's possible? Okay. So if there is indeed a good leader, they should be able to get someone to follow them, be able to use the power of influence. Good leader sets the bar higher, as we mentioned earlier. Employees, team members, they really appreciate it when you actually have high expectations of them. It means that you trust them to do well. You know that they can do better. This is a process, because sometimes when you're challenging people to go above and beyond their comfort level, there tends to be a pushback. It's just like any other change. However, as a team member, if they know that you're recognizing a brightness that's shining within them, that's something that they appreciate. And most of them will raise to the occasion. And a very important aspect of project managers and leaders in general is to serve as you lead. Be a servant leader, if you will. This helps you to not only build the relationships, but also to understand those who you're leading. Is anyone in here familiar with servant leadership? Or does anyone consider themselves to be a servant leader? How would you describe yourself as a servant leader? How do you manifest those traits, characters?
You set the vision, give everybody what they need to do the job, you allow them to do the work. You step in the leadership role or you manage when you have to. But your job is to serve them. You know, they have things that are keeping them from doing their job or from, you remove that obstacle. That's what I was talking about earlier. I serve them. You manage when you have, I guess, say, performance issues, stuff like that. That's when you manage, or you lead, when you're setting the vision and the tone and moving them along the way. That's kind of how I see it.
So you're communicating, you're giving them what they need, you're ensuring that they're taken care of. And what about you?
I try to do two things. One, I try to let them see how I help my boss, how I serve them, and on the other side, I try to enable them to be successful.
Okay.
Not get in their way of doing their job, watch from behind the scenes, and then just quietly go in and help when I can before a problem starts.
Sure. So they see you supporting your manager, and then also turn they're going to support you, and then also you're enabling them. So you're supporting them and not just expecting them to support your work. So those are great examples. They say, you know, one of the most difficult things to give away is kindness, because it's always returned. And this is an interesting quote for me, because it just reminds me of other, you know, verses, quotes I've heard in the past, like how you can pretty much, you know, just reap coals over someone's head with kindness. And I didn't really realize this till actually experiencing it. And it's very hard. Even the most difficult stakeholder, you know, can be amenable if you're consistently professional with them, respectful with them, kind and considerate from their perspective with regard to, you know, how they feel about different decisions that you're making in the organization. And it just makes it difficult for anyone to be completely antagonistic if you're making the effort to work with them. So I think that's a really powerful quote. And these are just different ways they were, you know, generous enough to share ways that they serve as servant leaders. These are other ways, in accord with those, or possibly in addition to ways that you can serve as a leader. Genuinely appreciating the contribution of your team members, saying thank you, and really meaning that when you say that you thank them for their contribution, because everyone has a unique contribution to the team. Showing that outward appreciation. So say you have a steering committee, spotlighting that IT or that marketing member on the team for the unique individual work that they did, and, you know, telling them a job well done. Listening, and not only listening to their perspectives, but learning from them, realizing each individual has something unique to contribute, and we can, you know, learn something new from everyone. And incorporating what we learned from the team for future navigation. You know, everyone may have a bad project every now and then, but the biggest mistake is carrying it forward and repeating the same mistakes project after project. So you want to make sure that if you face some landmines in this project or the ones prior to, that you're improving that you're learning from those mistakes in the past. And ensure that, you know, they know what to expect from you. Try and have some level of consistency. We have to be flexible with regard to how we operate and lead, but also try and provide some type of reliability with your team members. And I say, you know, this is my personal opinion as far as being thankful for the honorable position of leadership, because really and truly, when you think about it, there are only a few people who are deemed eligible to lead in organizations. So that says a lot, you know, that the organizations are giving you that level of responsibility, and, you know, it's something to really just be prideful of and you know, really appreciate. Serving, you know, overall it pays well, because at the end of the day, we serve our team members. They have a higher morale. They have greater dedication to us, to the team, to the organization, greater commitment. And, you know, overall, it's going to be better success. Goals are going to be reached better and faster. This is what I see as, and this may be exaggeratory, is the traditional model of project management, and this is more so the progressive model. I see the traditional model as being, you know, very rigid, and we're, you know, basically focused on the bare bones, just get it done, the tactical. We're not so much focused on as much the growth of the individuals on the team. This I see more so as a progressive model of project management. And that's one where we're feeding the team, that we're not just seeing it as this short-lived project, but it's a growing, ever-growing relationship with the different team members that we may work with on future projects, if you will. And it's also a way of seeing even the projects within themselves grow, because a lot of times a project may start one way, but it grows into a bigger project, or you have to change your scope and be more flexible. Okay, right here, it just shows emphasizing listening, as far as being a major element of the serving aspect of it. So when we're listening, we're not just hearing, but we're also looking. We want to look for that whole nonverbal behavior that is supposed to be about 65, 67% of communication. As we mentioned before, there's different behavioral types, different personality types. So the steady behavior, for example, type of person, it's much harder to read, what they're saying. So we have to pay more closer attention to them, because they may not be as obvious as, say, someone with a dominant personality type who's going to just flat out tell us, oh, we absolutely hate that idea, and this is why A, B, and C. So it's really important to find different ways to listen to people on your team, to really understand what their needs are, what the resources are that may or may not be lacking, what they need essentially to be successful. Serving is definitely a choice. And the first step of that is, as we discussed, acknowledging your personal biases that may be obstacles. What are our limitations as leaders? Communicate openly with sincerity. Try and be as transparent as possible with your team. As project managers, project leaders, we're often faced with information that we can't communicate to our team. Maybe, privy communications that at a later date may be disclosed. You don't have to tell your team everything that you're not allowed to. However, be transparent with regard to information that is open, and always give an honest answer, even if it's an answer of, I can't answer it at this time. But, it's very important to maintain that integrity with the people that you work with. Focus on them, and not yourself. And the reason why I say that is not that you're not important, but we naturally focus on ourselves. So that's more than likely going to happen anyways. But it takes extra effort, and in that we receive extra effort when we focus on the people who are leading. And be accessible. As a project manager, you're responsible for many different components with regard to ensuring that resources are procured, to you have the right people, the right number of people and resources on the team, you have the right technology enabled. We have to answer to a lot of different people from different sources. So we have to expect that and be accessible for the people who we are, the leaders who we are in that role. And remember who people are, including like what they do, what's important to them. That can go a long ways if you're able to build those relationships with the people on your teams. I'd like to throw this question out there. I'm sure many of us are currently leading projects. When you think of your projects and you think of, say, the top person in your head, who's your top performer on your projects today, who in the room could say that they know 5 things about their top performer? Can anyone? Great. Anybody else? Did you have your hand up? Okay, we have one person. Anybody else? And I find that interesting because it's one of the servant leaders, which that makes sense because, this is a very big aspect about leading and serving the people on your team. You want to know what their needs are, not only as project managers, but as a person holistically, because that's going to impact who they are. And people really care, not even if they're just on your project team, but like say, for example, you may have a conversation with someone 3 weeks ago and they ask you, hey, how did that turn out? And I don't know about you, but that makes me really feel good, when a person remembers the conversation they had about you, they follow up with regard to what's important for you. And similarly here, if you really genuinely care about your team members, they're going to care about you reciprocally. And it just helps the relationship and helps you to really flourish as a team.
But I also have
Mm-hmm.
top things about someone that may not be a top project manager, because then my job is to help them become one of the top.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to understand them.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, the top is usually easier for us to, the ones that we don't like as much, those are the ones we may be like, okay, tend to avoid some of us, whereas you're obviously taking a very healthy approach. But, you know, I think that's even more applaudable when you know about all of your team members. And, you know, really, from a project manager perspective, we all often look at it as it takes so much time, you know, to get to know people, to learn about them. But it really saves you more time in the long run, because when you have strong relationships, like you mentioned earlier, the power of relationships, things just move so much more quickly, so much faster, because there's just so much more trust and more care with regard to the dialogue. They don't want to let you down because they care about you. It's not just that they work with you. So similar to that, you know, repeatedly successful project leaders, they build teams. So it's not just about coordinating different people, but they're actually building teams, developing the identity of the team. So there's this accepted protocol, if you will, of how this group works together. They have similar expectations of each other, whether it's completing deliverables on time or how they like to communicate. Some may prefer in-person meetings versus remote conference calling. They like to receive weekly updates, you know, follow-ups electronically. There are different expectations that different teams have, but the project leader is responsible for ensuring that there is a team identity and that it's one that's understood among the group. Maybe different ways that they joke or how far they go with the jokes. Different elements like that that are even cultural components of the team. They're either going to happen in a way that is sporadic or they're going to be guided. So an effective leader can influence how that team looks and feels and build whatever it takes to be cohesive as a group. So that's really important to recognize. Yes, you have a group of individuals, but there's a difference between that individual identity versus that team identity. And the team makes the leader, and the leader makes the team. I like to say that because it's just so important. A lot of times as leaders, we see ourselves as wearing the strategic hat, or the team see us as maybe being distant from the subject matter expertise. And I like to say most of the time it's somewhere in the middle, but the bottom line is we all have different aspects that we bring to the table and contribute in different ways. So that's just really important as far as an appreciation of the different roles. Similarly, with regard to building a team, it's important to communicate on a regular basis and a lot of times in different ways. Meeting with your team at least weekly, I think, is really important. They don't have to be long meetings. It could be just, you know, each team member saying, hey, everything is still on green, we're going forward, but it's a way of taking the temperature. Of course, it doesn't have to be in person because some teams are even globally, but you want to make sure that that communication is taking place. You want to ensure that they're equipped with the information they need, the resources, the assistance that they need to get to the next level, the next milestone that they're reaching for. Empower your team members to do their job with innovation. That's not to say you're going to have all-star team members, but if you know you've picked some really good team members or some really good ones have been assigned, you need to trust them for what they're worth, what their reputation lies in front of them. That's going to save you time, that's going to save you energy, and that's going to get the most creative and innovative product from those team members. And then coach those problem areas. Like he mentioned, he's going to have some team members, or he may have had some team members in the past that weren't as good performers as some of the other ones. He's taken the time to coach them. We can't assume that each team member is coming with the same level of capacity to, you know, pretty much contribute on the team. Different members are going to need different levels of coaching and monitoring and things of that nature. And so they each should be treated in an individualized way. And, you know, I hinted on this earlier, just making sure that you have transparent communication with your team and really developing that team in a way that is going to be long-lasting. And this just lists different ways that you can manage teams' communications. Some or all may apply as being important, you know, beneficial for yours, respectively. And along the same lines with regard to communication, recognizing when there are going to be tough messages that will need to be conveyed, you know, that is important because sometimes you do come up with challenges. And the worst thing you can do as a project manager is to avoid those challenges because they do not go away. And the challenges don't have to be simply between you and another project member. It may be among project members. It may be a sponsor or a stakeholder that's not on your immediate team. Make sure you address those. because they don't go away. They tend to build even bigger and become more uncontrollable. So those difficult decisions, those difficult conversations are often important to have earlier than later. And appreciating diversity is really important. A successful leader realizes they don't know everything. A great mix on your team is often beneficial, where you have people from different cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary areas, different backgrounds, different perspectives with regard to customer bases. All of these elements of diversity is going to help that team to perform more holistically, more competitively. Reward those behaviors that support that. Inclusion, collaboration, open-mindedness. This is going to help your team to be more creative, to develop essentially better products and services. And mentor when you have that opportunity to do so, because that also is something that creates a culture of openness and growth within your organization. And similar to that, not only mentoring from the perspective of being able to create openness within your organization, but always look to maintain a level of succession, not only with your team, but ultimately for your organization's sake. If your organization is growing in a way that's positive, you're going to more than likely have more projects next year than this year. And that's just the nature of just the focus on being more agile. A lot of organizations are going forward. So what you want to be able to do is say, hey, I contributed to the development of other project managers. And they may not be project managers today. They may be simply serving on your team, identifying those skill sets that you know are good to make a good project manager, and mentoring those individuals is just really helpful for the organization overall. So when you look at your teams, do you see people who are ready or able, would you say, to lead the teams that you manage? Like, by a show of hands, is there anyone who thinks if they left the organization, it would be very difficult for them to find anyone to replace you within the organization to lead the team? You all are that easily replaceable?
A lot of us are contractors. They just call and get another project.
Okay. That's a good thing though, because I feel like if you can easily exit, that means that there is knowledge that's being shared, and it's a healthy place to be, from the perspective of ensuring that you do have a smooth transition, and that is really the ideal scenario. I always say the best measure of a leader is when that leader leaves. What's left of that organization? If the organization crumbles, that means that wasn't an effective leader at all. That's my opinion, at least. I think a good leader leaves a very good foundation and good structure behind them with regard to the team that they build, as well as the people and the resources and information. And along those lines, just making sure that you have a central repository. People are updating their information, that it's not from version 1 from January, but the version 5 from March and April and May are also included in that repository, whether it's a SharePoint or another tool. And I'm sure this is something very common in project management, but just making sure that you do have that updated information in your projects. That just helps if someone decides to disappear. And now I want to look at specifically different styles of leading that people tend to gravitate to. There are different ways to certainly approach leading teams. And this one, pretty much just describes a project manager that is a steel type, I would describe it as. It's that project manager, nothing gets through you, you hoard all the information and vehicles to get anything done, and you pull the ultimate trigger on everything. That project manager says, my job is secure. So I'm sure that's no one in this room, but I dare to ask, do you know anyone like that who hoards all the information? Okay. So how does that feel when it's hard to get information, and why do you think they do it?
I don't think their job is secure.
Yeah, they definitely hold it, though. I mean, I'm a little bit that way, but I guess when you get that level or something, they use power, they don't want to disseminate. Because some of these guys, our Swedes, actually said they're going to be retiring soon. So
Ooh, that's scary.
wow.
And how much time do you think is wasted when they do that? How much time do you think is wasted trying to get the information or reconstructing? Anybody else works with anyone like that? You do? How's your experience?
Well, they tend to be not so much project people, but my developers and my subject matter experts, or it's like pulling teeth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. In some areas, don't have that one person that is the pivotal role. Like
Yes.
does it.
Yeah.
That person got hit by a car. We're all.
Oh my, yeah.
See, I think that's some of management's fault, because these people are who they are. I mean, they're gods. And so I don't understand why management hasn't tried to fish some of that stuff, make sure that that information gets out there.
Sure.
Catalog. It's a lot of it, sometimes, like going back to that repository
Mm-hmm.
slide there, you have to document stuff. You got to have everything recorded, procedures and all that knowledge. So I think
Yeah.
sometimes that's easy to not do,
Mm-hmm.
because they're so busy doing their greatness, they can't document.
Right, and that's why I like the repository, because that's a very formal way of getting people to share versus in the past. And I think that's technology in general, that it enables us to share information. But it still has to be a change in the culture. Like if someone is allowed to do it, even with something so direct and so straightforward as, central repository, then, that's a part of the culture that probably needs to be addressed. I call this the wood type of leader. As a project manager, things permeate rarely, though only when pulled and prodded out from the team members. You are a tough gatekeeper. You only need to know but so much. This person, they're going to give you a little information, but they're not going to give you that much. And it's only going to be after you've given them 3 or 4 requests. And they're similar to the other version, but they'll give you a little bit. And, we work with these types as well. And then this project manager, things permeate, but you give only as absolutely needed to get the assigned task complete. So this project manager, when we meet this week, they may tell us what we need to know to get our work done for the next week, but they're not going to tell you anything about the month of June or July. And I think there are 2 motives behind this, and maybe more. For one, it's a communication of power from the earlier example. And then secondly, it's a lack of trust. That's how a project manager is going to treat their team members when they don't trust them to either understand the information or what they'll do with the information. And team members understand, when they're being belittled or distrusted. So it can be a very demoralizing approach to communication that project managers use in this instance. And then this is the project manager that I call the water type, where knowledge flows generously, but it's without any intention, any strategy. There's no planning involved. So it's like, what would you like to know? So this is the type of project manager that just throws information at everyone. Like, well, why are they telling me this? This has nothing to do with my role or responsibility. They don't really strategically guide their team members with communication. It's just an overflow of information, and they leave it to everyone else to suggest what to do with that information. And, this is essentially, my favorite type of leader. And that's the person who does share, generously with communication, with how to develop others. They tend to be mentors, actually, of what a project manager should be like, what a leader should be like developing others. They're strategic with what they communicate and morally developing, in their communication. Learning is contagious with these type of leaders. And oftentimes when you have a team like this where the leader is very generous with information, you have a very healthy project team, they tend to be the example of the organization. So not only does everyone wants to work for this leader, but also, everybody wants this team to work on their project or figure out how can the other teams be like this best practices team. There's no way to really get to this point without a very healthy level of communication between the project manager and the team members respectively. So a good teacher has been defined as one who makes himself or herself progressively unnecessary, and that's something that we've talked about. A good leader is going to pass on that information and those skill sets that are needed to produce other leaders in the organization. And a repeatedly successful project manager, as mentioned earlier, always willingly accepts responsibility. It's not to say that you're always taking the fall for everyone, but you know, at the end of the day, when there are accolades for a project, when the project saves $2.5 million, they're going to look at you, you're going to get all the applause. So on the flip side, you should be able to accept a lot of the responsibility as well. So if, say, something goes wrong and team member A was the cause of a certain problem, that doesn't mean that you always have to point out, this is what team member A did. You know, that type of behavior really does not foster teamwork, but it fosters a culture of scapegoating and you know, pointing the finger and blaming responsibility. And so you want to ensure that the way that you communicate is the way that you want team members to communicate about others. So fostering collaboration, fostering a culture that is tolerant of risk. You know, if a team member is going to get a hammer thrown at them when they take a risk and maybe it's not the most successful, then they're going to be afraid to take any other risks in the future that may potentially put the organization, the team, in a very rewarding light. So I say it's just harsher words, but you know, the buck really stops with us as project managers. And you know, this is just similar to what I just said, you know, just the negative aspects of scapegoating and how it really just builds a demoralizing culture among your team members. So what I want to do right now is a self-assessment on project leadership, and you should have a sheet that says self-assessment on it in your packet. It may be the last sheet, I'm not sure. And so the possible answers here are 1, 3, and 5. 1 for no, you don't agree with the statement as it applies to yourself as a project leader. 3, you somewhat agree with the statement or it's somewhat true. Or 5, you do agree with the statement. Yes, it is true. Number 1, the type of power I use most of the time is based upon my ability to influence. That means usually I get people to do things by being able to influence them. Number 2, I'm willing to wear all hats of which I am capable to implement my project effectively. I don't mind basically stepping into